Hello, and welcome to today's video where we will be having a conversation with NASA intern Jorge. Hello, Jorge.
Hi, Zoe. Thanks for having me. Nice to be able to speak with you and Tech Equipment. So I'm looking forward to this interview. Just to share a little bit about myself, my name's Jorge Arturo Levario Delagarza. I just go by Jorge. I'm actually studying mechanical and biomedical engineering at the University of Texas at Arlington, where I'll actually be finishing up right here in December 2024. So during my time in university, I've had the opportunity to be involved in student-led organizations such as the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, where I served as my chapter's president. I've served regionally and nationally as well. I was also part of my university's rover team, where I had the opportunity to be chief engineer. And I've also had the opportunity to do internships at Lockheed Martin, at SpaceX, and at NASA's Johnson Space Center. And I'll be working full-time at NASA's Kennedy Space Center.
We were going to talk more about your internships because I know you said you've had more than one. So if we go through kind of the process, which one you started first, their length of time, and maybe kind of your key takeaways from that if you want.
The first one I got, I worked at Lockheed Martin Missiles and Fire Control, where I worked on the high mobility artillery rocket system as a reliability and safety systems engineer. And then I worked at NASA's Johnson Space Center as an OSTEM intern as a battery safety engineer. And then after that, I switched to the propulsion systems team. And then after that, I had the opportunity to do two internships at SpaceX, the first one being at their headquarters in Hawthorne, California, where I supported the HLS mission management team, the human landing system. Then after that, I worked at Starbase, where I supported the ground support team, stage 0, so essentially just launch engineering and things like that. And then after that, had the opportunity to work at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, where I supported ground systems as well. And most of my work was supporting the Commercial Crew Program and the various launch pads that are owned by SpaceX, by ULA. So yeah, having mentioned all that, I'll briefly just talk about my first internship at Lockheed Martin. So I worked as a high mobility artillery rocket system. So essentially, I was just doing a lot of reliability and safety engineering. So, there's a fleet of HIMARS all over the world, and just being able to track, what they're doing, how the maintenance is working, and things like that is what I was working on. I can't really say too much more about it just because a lot of it is very proprietary, but it was a great learning experience. So yeah, I supported, but I can't say at a high level that I did support the HIMARS. So yeah, that's a little bit about what I did at Lockheed.
What was your most useful internship, would you say? Or were they all useful in their own individual ways? Or was one better than the other?
Yeah, so great part is I can share a little bit more about what I did at NASA and SpaceX.
Mm.
So at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, I supported the lithium ion batteries team. So essentially, we did a lot of testing on lithium ion batteries, and essentially, long story short, um, fractional thermal runaway calorimetry. Essentially, lithium ion batteries can have what they call thermal runaway events, which is essentially when the battery overheats. It'll have a very exergonic reaction, so it'll um, explode. And you can watch videos online of like Tesla superchargers or Samsung Note 7s or even NASA's Robo Simian at the Jet Propulsion Lab in California. They all were being fueled by lithium ion batteries because it's very energy dense, but they all exploded because of thermal runways. So being able to characterize conditions for, how do you design batteries and how do you lay them out in series or in parallel to the point where they won't propagate and cause a big domino effect that we don't want happening on the ISS or in space in general. So that was my first internship, was learning a lot about that. After that, I had the opportunity to shift over to the propulsion systems team, where being a mechanical engineer, I didn't really have a lot of background in propulsion systems. So learning about, you know, NASA's Morpheus vehicle, which is the project that I was supporting. Um, it's essentially the spacecraft that, I mean, I wouldn't really call it a spacecraft, but it's like a drone that has four spherical tanks. So working on the reaction control system thrusters, which help control its attitude during flight, is what I was working on. So running static fire tests, you know, characterizing reliable ignition conditions, because you don't want to have no light conditions in space where your engine doesn't turn on when it's supposed to, you know, things like that. So that was my second internship. And this was the one that really taught me a lot about propulsion, because what I learned here has trickled down into my other internships. So then fast forward to what I got the opportunity to work on at SpaceX, on the HLS mission management team. It was very high level. So for those who aren't familiar, SpaceX will be designing and building the human landing system, which is essentially just a variant of Starship. And the human landing system will be responsible for landing the astronauts on the moon and, you know, kind of being their safe haven and from while they're on the lunar surface. So, you know, how do you optimize the mission and the whole mission design? So we did have to work with NASA, because NASA is sending the crew on the Space Launch System rocket on the Orion spacecraft. So the crew will have to transfer over to HLS, and HLS is what's going to land them on the moon. So just having a high level of all the systems, how those all play a piece, and how they integrate together during the different parts of the mission phase is what I was responsible for, just characterizing and understanding all that. And then shifting over to when I was at Starbase in South Texas, in Boca Chica, I had the opportunity to support launch pad operations. So just making sure that the launch pad was ready for flight. So a lot of the efforts that I did was everything that was on the ground. So, for example, the booster transports itself via a ring wall. So I had the opportunity to lead the ring wall project and make sure that everything checked out and it was fully able to support booster transport. So after that, I just did a lot of other small ground support system projects on the launch pad. And then after that, I had the opportunity to transfer over to NASA's Kennedy Space Center as a NASA Pathways intern. And just to briefly distinguish the difference between a Pathways intern and an OSTEM intern is that Pathways gives you the opportunity to convert into a full-time civil servant. So for those who are interested in NASA internships, there's OSTEM internships and there's Pathway internships, and both are very great. And I learned a lot in the OSTEM program. I learned a lot about the agency, and it ultimately did give me the opportunity to be able to convert over to a Pathways intern, where I now have the opportunity to convert into a full-time civil servant upon graduation. And they also do have graduate programs as well. So at Kennedy Space Center, I actually had the opportunity to support in launch control for Crew 7, which was actually the first international crew. We had NASA, we had JAXA, we had Roscosmos, and we had ESA. So we had all four space agencies represented in this flight. And it was great to be able to support that from launch control and, you know, being able to support other missions such as the Psyche launch, which is going to be a spacecraft that's going to go explore a metallic asteroid in our solar system, and it's going to get there in 2029. So being in launch control when it launched from Cape Canaveral was an amazing experience as well. So a lot of the work that I did was just making sure that the ground systems were checking off all the boxes to be able to proceed to have a healthy launch on launch day, because you don't want problems coming from the ground. You ideally. So that was a lot of what I did. And I would say the one that really taught me a lot, because each one of them were different in their own way. But what I had the opportunity to do at NASA's Kennedy Space Center and being able to support from launch control was an experience that I really enjoyed and learned a lot from, because I learned all the protocols that you have when you're dialing into launch control and you're supporting operations such as static fire, such as launch, things like that. And just seeing how dialed in everyone else was super helpful for me. And then also at SpaceX, I got to learn how the private industry operates because it's very different from NASA, because NASA, like ESA, is a government agency. So there is a lot of government play into all the operations, but at SpaceX, it's private. So there's a little bit more freedom for the engineers to do what they need to do to get the job done. And there's a reason SpaceX is launching and landing literally every other day is because their launch cadence is very high due to the fact that the engineers do have a lot of freedom to be able to innovate. So both of those experiences were really great and they were really insightful. So yeah, it's kind of hard to pick one, but definitely like my time at Kennedy, my time at Johnson Space Center, and my time at SpaceX, both in headquarters as well as at Starbase. I definitely got to see a different piece of the space industry during each rotation that I had, and being able to support Starship, but also being able to support the commercial crew program and sending humans to space is definitely super fulfilling and rewarding. So yeah, definitely great learning experiences all around.
What impact did having that internship have on your study? Was there kind of anything that you took and then used, or is it more just a learning process?
Being able to do internships gives you a whole different perspective because when you're in academia, you're kind of wired and trained one way of how to pass exams, how to learn material very quickly. And then when you come into the industry, it's not like academia, you don't necessarily have to memorize everything like how you have to do for an exam. But the things that I did in academia and the industry, such as, planning out your day, sticking to schedules, meetings, responding to emails, how do you email people, like who has the email sent to them, who gets carbon copied, and who gets BCC'd. Like there's a whole hierarchy to communication. Also, like how you approach a problem in industry may be different because in industry you don't necessarily have the answers in the back of the textbook, but for the classroom you do. And for the classroom, you're wired to train one way, you're wired to study one way. And then when you're in industry, it's all about being resourceful. Like, how can you find the information you need as quickly as you can? Or if you can't find the answer, find someone who knows the answer. And just kind of having a contact list of, who knows what. If I have this question, I go to this person. Versus in academia, you don't really have that because you're kind of responsible for knowing everything yourself. So I would say definitely being in industry rewired kind of a little bit the way I approach school because now um, I'm very cognizant of what I'm learning, and everything at school is super useful in the industry. But having the opportunity to be able to like dial in on one field or two fields um, in industry, and then when I come back to school, you kind of learn a little bit more about the theoretical side of things. So yeah, like industry definitely has had a huge effect on how I approach learning in university, how I approach my studies, how I organize myself, how I plan out my schedule, both for short term and long term goals. And then also like how to manage your time, how to communicate, and how to be resourceful. I think all these skills I've learned them in industry and they spill over whenever I come back to school and have to pass these classes that I have to take for my degree. So yeah, industry definitely has had an impact on my education as well.
Do you see any challenges or perceptions of challenges for a career at NASA? Or do you think nowadays that there is a lot less barriers, so people should be aspiring to work for companies like NASA or SpaceX?
Yeah, I would say that um, NASA. definitely, and SpaceX as well, they do value diverse skill sets. Like NASA doesn't, I know there's a stigma that like maybe NASA only hires aerospace or mechanical or electrical, but that's couldn't be farther from the truth. Like they have every field because they have every need. Because a lot of their work is not just in aerospace, but in promoting like outreach and things like that. And someone has to be able to pay for all of it. So you need people with economics and finance backgrounds, and obviously like people who can market it. So you need people with media backgrounds, marketing backgrounds, communication backgrounds. So there's opportunities all over the place. And NASA and SpaceX both do a very good job of with their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. So there is a diverse workforce that works for both the agency as well as, the private company. So there's opportunities there as well. And a lot of times I feel like students don't apply because they don't think that they are qualified for the position, or they self-eliminate because they don't think that they have what it takes to work at these companies. But I would say that, you know at least coming from my background, like I don't necessarily go to a top engineering school, versus like MIT or Harvard or Stanford or Cornell or Purdue or all these big aerospace or big engineering schools that we have over here in the States. Um, but just being confident in your own abilities and being able to apply is the first step. So not self-eliminating and knowing that there's openings for literally every single field. So, just taking a look and seeing what matches your background and your skill set is the first step to take in applying to, become an intern or, become part of the workforce. So yeah, just not being afraid to apply.
What is your career aspiration? So I know because obviously you were interested in space from a really early age. Is it you just want to kind of stay in this industry, stay at NASA, or do you see this as kind of a stepping stone for something greater?
It's funny you mentioned, like when I first started working at NASA, I kind of was just like, okay, I'll see what happens and just remain flexible, and being able to do internships with, SpaceX as well, and being able to rotate out to different parts of the country and, support the space industry. So yeah, obviously like in the near future, I'd love to be part of the space industry. Um, I've also always wanted to work in Antarctica, so looking out for different opportunities to be able to do that is something that I'll also be aspiring to do. And there's many ways to do it, either as a scientist, as an engineer, or there's many other pathways to be able to get there. So that's another aspiration I have. And, in the near term future, I want to continue to support sending humans to space. So getting more experience in launch control, maybe being able to lead my own mission, or, lead the ground team, or, lead the spacecraft team, or maybe I get transferred over into a different, maybe I go back to SpaceX and do the same thing over there. And then obviously, of course, like the whole reason I'm into the space industry is because like I would like to be an astronaut. So having the opportunity to go to space and being an expert in space systems and everything that it takes to send humans into space. So yeah, being an astronaut is obviously my ultimate career aspiration. So working towards that goal is a good goal to have, and it's something that I'll definitely keep in mind for the future. And I'll be working towards it without, because obviously becoming an astronaut is, um, the odds are never in your favor, but being able to stick it out, being persistent, and, doing things that I really enjoy doing, even if I were to never become an astronaut, is kind of the way I approach the future. So, yeah, in a nutshell, that's kind of what I see for my career aspirations in the short term and in the long term. So we'll see what happens, but I'm ready for all of it. So we'll just kind of play it by ear and see what happens.
Are there any top tips that you would share with the audience today, with even younger generations, so people in school who are thinking about being an engineer, or even engineers now who are considering going into NASA?
Perseverance is definitely the first one off the top of my head because, like I did mention, like I did originally get rejected from UT Arlington, but obviously being perseverant and persistent, like sometimes it doesn't work the first time around, but that doesn't mean it won't work around. It won't work ever. That just means it won't work today. Um, a lot of times, like I think of fail often, fail forward. So basically, what that means is, fail often, fail early, fail forward. Um, the more you fail, the more you learn how not to do something, the more you learn how when something breaks, the best way to learn how it works is to fix it. And the more you fail, the more likely you are to continuously find a right answer. So kind of the way I see it is I've failed maybe 500 more times than the person next to me. So I know 500 ways that won't work out. That's kind of the way I see it. So failing forward, just try not to repeat mistakes, but make lots of mistakes so that way you can learn from them. And then also being in control of your attitude because not everything's going to go your way all the time, but that doesn't mean it won't ever go in your way. You just have to, I think the way it's very easy to be, happy and content when things are going like a smooth linear path, but when things don't go the way you expected them to, then your attitude is what's going to carry you. And it says a lot about you. A lot of times astronauts are asked, how would you feel if you spent maybe 4 years training for a mission and you ended up getting scrubbed off like on the day before and your backup ended up flying in your place or you got de-assigned from the mission, like how would that make you feel? And a lot of times astronauts have to live with those realities and be able to like answer those types of questions. So um, your attitude says everything about you, especially when things don't go your way. And then also, like I mentioned, I did read a lot of books on Audible. So that's one way to learn about anything you want to learn about, but specifically the industry. Like if you want to work in the space industry, there's many books out there. There's many autobiographies of astronauts, of administrators, of flight directors. All these people at NASA and SpaceX that write about what their experiences are like is a great way to learn more about the space industry. Highly recommend it. I learned a lot. I think my favorite book has personally been An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, and it's by Canadian Space Agency astronaut Chris Hadfield, or retired CSA astronaut Chris Hadfield. And I think one of the things I took away from his book was that he talks about that there's either plus ones, zeros, or minus ones. So plus one is someone who adds value to a group. A zero, someone who doesn't add or take away value, and a minus one is someone who takes away value. So what he mentioned is a lot of people do try to go above and beyond, and a lot of people try to be a plus one. But what Chris Hadfield recommends is aiming to be a zero. So when you aim to be a zero, you don't add or take away value. So he mentioned that a lot of times in his training, like he would aim to be a zero. So he wouldn't try to like Superman the space shuttle or whatever, but he would do the little things right and he would catch mistakes from maybe his colleagues. And that's actually what got him his first mission assignment was because he caught a mistake in a simulator, and that's what got him the opportunity to fly into space. So aiming to be a zero, I kind of replicated that in the sense that when I joined the rover team, I wasn't trying to be the lead. Or when I would join the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, I wasn't trying to be the president. I would do the little things like clean up when the event's over, give people rides who need them, stick around, be present, be consistent. And over time, the opportunities did come And all that came from with the mindset of aiming to be a zero. So just being perseverant, never giving up, aiming to be a zero, fail often, fail early, fail forward, but most importantly, find something what you're passionate about. Take on leadership opportunities in school. I think the more leadership opportunities you take, the more you'll learn, especially if you take them in different fields. Like if you're a leader in a technical organization and then in a non-technical organization and you're able to lead both, um, those skill sets rarely overlap. So when they can find that in one person, that definitely does say a lot about you. So yeah, being a leader in that, and also look for certifications in your field, and the combination of all that and finding what you're passionate about because you'll be better at it and more enthusiastic about it. Definitely all those will put you somewhere in the right direction. So that's a little bit of the feedback that I can provide you and the tech equipment audience.
Well, thank you. And yeah, thank you for taking the time to obviously come and speak to us and speak to our audience. We hope that they've learned something or learned more about you and been inspired by what you've said today to either work in the space industry or just take those top tips, and even whatever field of engineering they are in, take those top tips and really use them, and hopefully they will help. So yes, thank you so much for taking the time and for all our audience being here today. This has been a conversation with NASA intern Jorge. We will link his information in the description box below. So if you do have any burning questions, I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them for you. And if you are interested in any of our other playlists, we also have a designated a conversation with where you can watch more inspiring content. So that's it from us today. Thank you for watching. And again, thank you, Jorge, for being our conversation with speaker. It's been great and wonderful and very interesting to be with you today. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Y'all have a good one.